Welcome to Closer to Venus. In this episode, we will speak with Christine Alisa. She is an alternative therapist, a marriage therapist, and author of several books, including The Ordinary Shaman. Chris, welcome to Closer to Venus. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Johnny. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I have lots of questions about The Ordinary Shaman, but before we even get into that, how did you get onto the path to become an alternative, or should I say a past life therapist?
I think the story or the background of how I became a past life regression therapist is really about my story, my personal story. That I started out my career as an elementary school teacher, and I found that I wasn't able to reach the kids. In fact, I had one boy in my classroom who couldn't concentrate, was always in trouble, and I found out that he had witnessed his father killing his mother, and nobody was doing anything about it. There were no resources, and nobody was getting any help. So it just kind of hurt my heart. I just knew that teaching, I wasn't going to reach enough kids in the way I wanted to. Mm-hmm. So I went back to school and became a marriage family therapist. And I was able then, everything just like fell into place. I was able to really find wonderful mentors and teachers who helped me learn a profound way to work with children. And then things started happening in my own personal life. I had a divorce, my life crumbled. I had 5 car accidents in a period of 5 years. And my chiropractor said to me, nope, stop. This is wrong. You need to go to this very special therapist. He's a past life therapist. So I did. What happened was all of my childhood repressed memories, if that makes sense, came forward. And I found the reasons why I had been depressed in my life, why my relationship hadn't worked. It emerged not only a lot of childhood abuse, but some past life issues that were deeply connected to my childhood. And so being very fascinated with this and my own growth as a result, I became one of his students, and he trained me how to do the work. I eventually used it with my own clients and saw how profound it was for them and how it really opened up what we call an awareness in them and an understanding and what we call a clearing of these old traumas and experiences. And then I went on to put that together with working with children, and I found a way to connect past life therapy with children in my own way. And so it all evolved really from my own personal growth.
So you had what we would call a hands-on experience. You actually experienced the past life therapy as a patient, and that inspired you to become a student and eventually become a practitioner. Would it make sense that past life therapy can be a little bit more effective at uncovering behaviors, as you mentioned in the children, that are buried as opposed to traditional therapy?
Yes, it has a way of helping children with what we call the unconscious pieces that are driving their behavior. When I talk to children, I always tell them, it's kind of like you have these little drivers inside of you that are driving you to this behavior, whether it's not being able to pay attention in school or maybe acting out and getting in trouble or, having anger issues, which is a big one with kids. And so these drivers have a source, and that source can come from something that's actually happened to them. Mm-hmm. And so this is just their way of coping with maybe a trauma that happened to them in the past or some experience in their family that was difficult. But I was able to pull out some past life issues with them that was also the source of the driver. And there's a boy that I worked with. He started off with me when he was about 9, and he was just, he couldn't pay attention to school. He was ADD, ADHD, and just couldn't. He was just like jumping on roofs. He was just out of control. His father had custody of him, but his mother she didn't have any contact with him anymore, but she had been the source of some abuse she had abused this boy. But he had even repressed all that had happened to him.
That's in his current life. Would that be his current mother?
His current mother.
Right. And that was repressed. Okay.
Divorced. Yeah. His stepmother, his father, brought him to therapy. What happened was, in the course of our work together, he found a past life where he had been in Vietnam as a tortured convict of the Viet Cong. And what they had done is they had said to him, you have to tell us what is happening in some other area. They were wanting information. And all he would do is go and say, name, rank, serial number. And that's all he kept saying over and over again. And then they finally killed him. So he never told. Okay, so that's the important piece. He never told. He never said where the American troops were. This kicked into his abuse because he never told anybody about what his mother had really done.
Interesting parallel there.
Within about a week of that session, maybe 2 weeks, he was able to go into what his mother had actually done, which was draw a knife to him and say she was going to kill him. He was able to get into that. We go through a process where we really go deeply and talk just to the unconscious mind. And then he was able to reveal that. At the end of his therapy, which is a little bit later, his mother came to visit. This was a big deal. He came back to the session to me afterwards and he said, guess what? I beat the boogeyman. He didn't get affected by her. He just said, hello, how are you? Didn't really have any what we call triggers, like fear or anger. He went from not being able to concentrate in school to being president of student council straight A's. When you can get to the source of the issue, it can change behavior in children and in people and adults.
Do you feel that there might be a stigma attached to past life therapy, which is obviously connected with the realm of near-death experiences, reincarnation, and so forth? Or are we finally approaching that point where people are starting to believe more in reincarnation and past lives, and that, in this case, a legitimate source of therapy, and that could be very helpful?
Well, I think there's still a stigma. I think that it depends on, the community. I am finding, I'm in California, and so there's a lot of people that are into alternative kinds of medicine and holistic kinds of things. So I find here that there's a more openness to it, and it's really sort of become where a lot of people have been trained to be past life regression therapists. So it's pretty accepted. But then there are other people that, that's really doesn't fit for them. Maybe they don't even believe in therapy. There's certainly a stigma, I think, but it depends on, I think, where people are. And maybe there's becoming a little bit more openness to it.
Seems like it.
We talk a lot about the thinning of the veil, which is, that, on earth to above and beyond. And that veil is thinning. What that means is there's more, in a spiritual sense, opening up to things that maybe we wouldn't have been open to before.
Very interesting point. I had a conversation with a woman about that, about the thinning of the veil being where we are in this period in time, 2021, actually. Do you think that kind of makes it easier to do the kind of work that you do as opposed to if you were doing this like 30 years ago? Definitely?
Yeah.
Seems like it.
Yeah. But about 30 years ago, there was a big push and it was very popular. So I think it's also, people are opening up to it, but I think they're also expanding into other things like you're having on your program.
Lives between lives and that thing, and really taking this work and going further, as in the work Dr. Michael Newton, who did a lot with and I think they're actually called LBL therapists. Right. Which I think is incredibly cool. Now, since you brought it up, the thinning of the veil, where we are, is it maybe easier for people that are open to the idea to actually access these memories themselves? Or do they still need someone like you to kind of guide them through to actually get there?
Well, I've had people that have listened to maybe a therapist or somebody that is guiding them through a kind of regression. Because there are certainly therapists that do that. You can listen to podcasts or whatever. What those clients come back and tell me is they could only go so far and they couldn't quite get through it. So I think it may open the doors for them to understand a little bit more about what the process of past life therapy is that my experience is that it's hard to really complete that on your own. It's a difficult thing to do.
I would think it is, especially for people that have trouble even meditating, which a lot of my friends have complained about at length. I get that. Other than the session where I guess you have to sit down with them and go through your process, besides that, what else is included in the therapy? Childhood experiences?
Yes, there's childhood experience. I work a lot with birth, because where there's traumas in birth, prenatal, past lives, even surgeries. So there's, like you said, the childhood trauma. But sometimes what we find is that there's things that happen in birth that keep somebody from really, truly feeling alive. Because in birth, that's our stress pattern. We're coming alive. And if there's any interruption with that or any difficulty, like, for instance, a cord being around the neck, and so then there has to be emergency C-section. So there's a feeling of maybe being stuck. And so when you have that feeling of stuck and you can't move, that creates an unconscious pattern. And so I work with that to clear that out, to free up people. It's a freeing, it's like, if you think of it as any external influence, whether it's being abused by somebody, that's external. Whether it's an external experience of something happening physically to you in birth, that's external. So we want to get it out. That's not who that person is. It's just an experience. So we work with birth a lot, as well as the past life regression itself, past life.
What is the difference, if any, between past life regression and past life therapy, or are they pretty much the same thing?
I really appreciate that question, because I believe there's a difference. I think there are a lot of people that do past life regression, which means they're going back and they're finding, let's say, a lifetime. They find a lifetime. Maybe in a session they find 2 or 3 lifetimes, but they're just finding the lifetime. Whereas in past life therapy, we're looking at the emotional impact of whatever happened to that person. We're looking at boundaries, like what started it, what ended it. Because in past life therapy, we're working, of course, with the unconscious mind, but we're working with the emotions and with a beginning and an ending. Because if you just do a lot of regressions, you're not getting boundaries. And what I mean by that is, how did that story begin and how did it end? Because the unconscious mind only goes around in cycles and cycles and cycles. It cannot problem solve and it can't find an ending. So, like, for instance, when you hear people say, oh, I'm never going to get over this, or it's going to last forever, or there's no way out. Those are like endless things with no boundaries. And so what we do is, in therapy, we're finding out, how did it start and how did it end?
So it sounds like the past life therapy is a more targeted approach, where you're trying to figure out what the source of a particular ailment or cause. And that's what it sounds like to me. I imagine you get this question, how many of your clients actually ask, how do I know if some of my friends and family in my current life that I knew in my past life? My girlfriend, my buddies, my family, which one of these people did I know in my past life or my past lives?
I hear that all the time. And also it happens in session where they'll be discovering a past life where there's another person involved. And then they go, oh, I think that's my husband now. So they're able to connect it in the session itself. So then that can kind of evolve as, sometimes I do sessions where somebody's having a very troublesome relationship. And I'll say, let's find where this problem started with that person. So we directly go to, where did that start? And so then they have a clear idea. Oh, yeah, this is I don't know, sometimes people call it karma together. That's done. But as far as, thinking, have I known my brother before? Or I think, yes, I think you knew them all before.
All of them.
My years of experience, that's what I've seen, that they're all familiar to you.
I've heard that quite a bit from professionals and people that have done the work and research and such, that basically people that are in your life and people that you gravitate to, it's because you knew them before. It makes sense?
Absolutely.
Right. If I was one of your clients and I said, I need therapy, my girlfriend just dumped me, and I want to find out if she dumped me in the life before when we lived in Atlantis or something like that.
Right, exactly. Okay, let's go. Let's find out.
I imagine it could get pretty interesting, right?
Yeah, pretty deep work. We try to keep our sense of humor.
Speaking of which, I'm one of your patients. And I walk into your office, I make an appointment, do all that good stuff, and I sit down and I tell you about whatever my issues are, which I'm not going to obviously go into here, but you know what ails me, you know what my things are. Give us a quick example of what you do to actually lead someone back to whatever the source of that pain is, whether in this life or whether it was during the Civil War or whatever life it came from.
Yeah, first of all, I kind of explained to them that we're going to be working with the unconscious mind, and that means I'm going to be asking particular questions of the unconscious mind. And that when I ask them, all I want them to do, or want you to do, if you're my client, is just give me the first thing that comes to mind. That means the first thing that pops in your mind. It might be something you see, it might be something you hear, it might be something you sense. So we're using those senses. And so some people might be more visual, some are more auditory, some are more kinesthetic. So I said, that's how it's going to work for you. You're going to either sense it a little bit more, or maybe you're going to visualize it more. So I just say, okay, so we're going to take, maybe this issue, and maybe it's fear or anxiety. People are feeling a lot of anxiety. So I'll just say, okay, so I want to take this anxiety from where it's coming from. And I want you to give me the first thing that comes to mind. And they might have a physical experience. Okay, so I'll ask, what are you feeling in your body? And they might feel, I feel something in my throat. And so then I take it from there. So we're finding it in the body, or I could say, what's the first thing you see? As we get into the process, I tell them that sometimes I'll ask you to repeat what you say, and that's only to keep the process going, that's all.
Typically, how many sessions are involved in this kind of work, or is that really too general of a question where it's going to depend on the circumstances?
Yeah, that's the answer.
I had a feeling that it was. But do you go back into the past life more than once or as many times as you need to? How does that generally work?
Again, it's so individual, but there are times I try to complete one lifetime at a session, but sometimes there'll be some other pieces that, especially in birth. Birth is one where we really have to go back into it because we want to know the baby's experience and the mother's experience. So that one has layers that we usually have to have more sessions. But it depends on the issues with people. I mean, I've helped a girl, 13-year-old girl, she did one session and that was it. And she was able to clear her feelings of low self-esteem. And she was also kind of had some eating disorder beginnings, and that went away. And I keep up with the family, and she's in college now and doing really well. So, and then you have people that, some long-term childhood trauma, and that's going to take a while to get through.
So it depends on what the goal is. Whatever this issue is to clear it, and that might take one session, it might take 20.
Yeah, and this is a relationship I have with clients. It's up to them how they want to continue. Sometimes people get to a certain stage and they go, that's enough for now. And they may come back at another time and go, oh, wow, something's come up again, so I want to work on that. That really happens with children a lot. I'll work with children. We'll get to a certain stage, things are going well, and then they become a teenager, and now something else is erupted. So that's because of developmental stages. It varies with the person and what their goals are, what they want to accomplish.
It seems that it is easier to uncover these memories, in children, which I've heard again and again and again. I know this is prevalent in the research of Ian Stevenson, where he worked exclusively with children, I believe under 8. Do you find the same thing or not necessarily?
Yes, they are able to access it a lot easier.
So it's even more important when kids have issues is to probably get them into therapy sooner than later, right?
Yes, that's always the best if they can do that.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Of course, that's not always the case. Can you give us an example of one of your clients that goes into a past life? I would imagine this is a regression session where they start describing the time and the clothes. Obviously, it's not their current life.
When they start describing the environment, I mean, I do that generally with different clients where we actually go and one of the things I start with was look at your feet. What are you wearing on your feet? And then they can kind of go up their body. Because I don't know, there's something about the feet. Oh, I've got sandals on, or I've got boots on, or, and then we kind of go on up the body. Oh, I'm wearing this kind of odd dress. Oh, it seems like it's from another era. And so as they do that, they kind of ground in this other self. It depends on how important that is. I don't spend a lot of time on that because I want to go to the experience. Because sometimes if we get too distracted with what's going on, I don't go into what date it is or any of that, but they do get a sense of, like I had a man who would pretty much think he was in some Persian war and he was the son of a king or warrior. And so he could tell what kind of embellishments or something he had on his body, armor, and so forth. So it is a way to kind of get a sense of what era it's in or what's the circumstance.
That has to be incredibly cool for the practitioner, for someone in your place, and probably for the patient as well. From your point of view, what does that feel like? Someone's telling you that they remember life from 500 years ago. It has to give you chills. It has to. Am I right? Or are you just used to it?
Yeah, I'm pretty used to it, but it is exciting for them.
Right.
And I guess I feel that if they're finding something that is so relevant to their life here and now and is able to clear those things out, that's really exciting. I try not to get caught up in where they are, but I do know that I want them to get healthy, so.
Yeah, right. That's obviously the main goal.
Yeah, I think what is wonderful for me about what you just said is when they can share these experiences of places they have been like 500 years ago, I can go, oh, wow, I get to talk to somebody about it.
Right. Or somebody that actually experienced it.
Right.
When you go through these sessions, and you obviously are very connected to your patients, does that trigger any past life experiences in yourself, or do you basically keep that separated and that never even comes into play?
Well, that's a very good question. I have done a lot of my own personal work on myself, been in therapy and worked through things. And so if anything feels a little bit like I'm getting triggered by somebody's issue, then I just go work on it on myself or get somebody to help me with it because I don't want any interference. Now, then I'm not present for the client.
Right. I figured that could be some sort of interference. What I really was trying to get at was, does it trigger a memory from a different time period? Right? Like someone's talking about being in Rome and maybe you had an experience. Does that ever come up or not really?
Well, it comes up with myself. I'll just internally go, oh, yeah, I was in Rome too. And I remember my experience in Rome. And I'll go and have this internal little dialogue with myself,
Wow.
Oh, remember when that happened? And, once in a while I'll share it with a client when they're kind of maybe resistant to, and they kind of want to know a little bit about my experience.
I would think they would probably want to ask at some point. I promise I won't bug you too more with these questions about time and place, but I know a lot of people that I talk to that are non-therapists and civilians, pedestrians, if you will. They'll ask a lot about time and place, like, did I live in Atlantis? Did I live in Egypt? In the work of Edgar Cayce, a lot of common places that came up were Egypt, ancient Egypt, Atlantis, and even some places in time that took place before any recorded history. Do you notice common time periods that come up more often than not?
Yeah, they're kind of all over the place. There was a period of time in my career when there were a lot of people that were in the camps in Auschwitz or any of the Nazi camps. So there was a whole period then where it just seemed I was getting clients that was a lot of their background. But as far as themes of different ones, I haven't really, seen that. I know that what I believe is that a lot of what I'm involved in different communities of light workers, and light workers can be all kinds of people doing healing work. But those healers, I have found when healers come to work with me, I find that they have actually their theme a lot of times is they have had lifetimes where they've been healers in the past, and they've been burned at the stake or killed or just banned from a community. So there's that's kind of a theme that happens of, how the past would just want to destroy people who are doing something different.
Something like, kind of like what you're doing now, someone who was a healer from the past. That's an interesting explanation of how that would make sense. I read about this years ago that Casey spoke a lot about Atlantis. Maybe he was obsessed with Atlantis. Maybe it was for a good reason. Have you had any of your clients tell about lifetimes in that period, Atlantis, Lemuria, or whatever the lost continents were at that time?
Yes, I've had some, and I have a client who describes Atlantis, and it was more his experience in Atlantis. He had a high position. And as you know, in Atlantis, there were the naysayers, and then there were the ones that were trying to speak the truth. And he was the one who was trying to speak the truth and, warn them of things. And there were others that said, no, this is not happening. Nothing's going to happen to us. We're fine. That was that experience for him of being in a place where in Atlantis, they just were denying, the truth.
What was going on?
So that was a theme there. And, I think for myself, I think it was in Lemuria, it was just a time of incredible learning and expansion. And then I think because of Atlantis and the expansion and learning and so forth in Lemuria, I think that sort of settled in the souls of many people who are back here again. And maybe your question is that there are some people who are kind of going, was I in Atlantis or Lemuria? And maybe that's the journey that they need to take, because they're looking at finding their own spiritual journey that's connected to the past, that they want to kind of awaken to that time when there was great awakening.
Yeah, that's very, very cool stuff. Can you tell us how shamanism works either in conjunction or, should I say, alongside of your past life therapy?
Well, with those clients who are open, who are willing to kind of learn a little bit about shamanism, I start off, I do a lot of meditating about clients before I even see them. Mm-hmm. So I have a way of kind of understanding what I need to work on. And when I do that meditation, like I did on a client recently, because I thought we were going to do some past life regression, it turns out she needed what we call a soul retrieval. Mm-hmm. And a soul retrieval is, in shamanism, it's what we describe as just a little piece of us, of our soul, just kind of went away because of some traumatic incident. In psychology, we call that disassociation, where we just kind of leave our bodies in a way for a little bit and kind of shut down. So, but it seemed that I couldn't do any other work with her until we had brought that soul part back. I know it kind of sounds strange, but I work with spirit, and they help to see if that soul part will come back, and it did. Mm-hmm. And she reported right away she felt better. It's like an integration of herself. So then she was able to do some other past life work. So there's some things that I think are important that shamanism can add to my work. We find out who their power animal is, so their totem. Right. And then once we find that totem can come in and help. Because sometimes doing these past life regression sessions, the therapy sessions, people get scared, they get anxious. It's important to make my office safe, to make it safe here. And if they're open to finding their power animal, then we call on that power animal to help. And they do, they come and help.
It would seem that, and the reason I brought that up is that I know very little about shamanism, but I know it has to do with connecting with the spirit world, which to me sounds like it's very close to connecting with angels and guardian spirits and so on, council of elders, where, again, the lives between lives space where you meet people that have passed before and so on and so forth. What's the difference between the life between lives experience and shamanism? They sound to me like they're closely related.
Yeah, they are closely related.
To the civilian who is not trained in these modalities, right? I think a lot of them are just trying to make sense of it. And Again, the stigma thing is going to come up because they think of New Age this and New Age that and the woo-woo part. And I don't like any of that either. But at the same time, if you believe in angels, guardian angels or guardian spirits or whatever you want to call them, then connecting with the spirit world is pretty much the same thing, I would think.
Yeah.
There might be, unless there's a hierarchy where not everyone's an angel, or maybe they are, I don't know, until we get to that dimension when we finally pass. But I think it's really important. The shamanism component's probably a discussion for another day, but it's very cool because there's probably cases that is more appropriate for than just the past life therapy. Am I right? Right. Excellent. How do listeners find you online?
Well, they can go to my website, which is just my name, ChristineAlisa.com.
Okay.
Or they can email me at chris@ChristineAlisa.com. But even on my website, there's a place to click where they have me email them back or call them back, and they can write down some of their questions or issues.
Awesome. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. You've been listening to the Closer to Venus podcast. I'm Johnny Burke. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.